All right, so welcome everyone, and thanks for joining us today. Please make yourselves comfortable and settle in for an exciting discussion. Before we begin, I'd just like to let everyone know that Forks Over Knives is now streaming their incredible documentary on their site for free. You can find it on www.forksoverknives.com. And in honor of their 10th anniversary, they have curated some special content, an oral history of the making of the film, their top 10 recipes and success stories, and they're now also offering a 25% discount on their top rated Forks meal planner. So be sure to check those out after our presentation today, and we'll begin shortly. Welcome to our panelists. Good to see everyone. Where is everyone coming in today from?
Well, we're from Cleveland.
I'm from upstate New York, near Ithaca.
I was still at home.
I am in Austin, Texas.
No snow today.
No.
I'm here in Washington,
Amazing.
D.C.
Los Angeles, California.
Amazing, so much variation, even from Canada. That's probably my family. Amazing. Wow, okay. People from all over the world, amazing.
I'm
think I
sorry,
just
my
saw
light keeps going on. Is it disturbing or is it distracting? Can you see?
Good, Colin.
Okay, good enough.
Wow, amazing. From all over the world, very exciting. So we're just gonna wait a little bit to let people come in.
How many people do you have?
So far we have over 700, almost 800.
Right now, we're live?
Mhm, mhm.
Holy
Yeah.
wow.
Yeah.
We are live.
They're watching it.
Brian, look what you've done.
So I just wanted to repeat again.
You and S, you and Colin.
I just wanted to mention again that Forks Over Knives is now streaming their incredible documentary on their site for free. You can find it on www.forksoverknives.com. And also in honor of the 10th anniversary, they have curated some special content. They have an oral history of the making of the film, their top 10 recipes and success stories, which are my personal favorites to read. And they're also offering a 25% discount on their top rated Forks meal planner. So be sure to check those out after our presentation today. All right. We are almost at 1,000 participants.
Let's start when we're at 10,000. That sounds good.
10,000. Okay. So it looks like lots of people are fans of the meal planners. It will be recorded, yes, and it'll be available later. So you can send it to all your friends. Okay, so I think we'll begin now. Everyone ready? Sounds good. Okay.
Roll.
So, welcome to the 10th anniversary of Forks Over Knives, the film that ignited the plant-based movement. My name is Nina Gheihman, and if someone had told me that I would be moderating this panel 6 years after watching the film that changed my life, I would never have believed it. Brian Wendel, the pioneer of Forks Over Knives, and I met when I interviewed him for my dissertation work at Harvard and for the book I'm currently writing about the plant-based movement with Bloomsbury. It's no understatement to say that Forks changed not only my career trajectory, but my entire life philosophy, that of my family's, as well as the lives of many others who are at the forefront of the plant-based movement today. That is why it is a true honor to host this event. We're here today not only to celebrate Forks' legacy, but also how far the plant-based movement has come in the last decade. Everywhere we look, people are talking about all things plant-based. World-class athletes credit plant-based diets for giving them a performance edge. High-profile investors in Silicon Valley are pouring money into alternative proteins. And over a quarter of Americans are cutting down on meat for health reasons. In today's webinar, we'll take a step back and look at how far we've come, as well as the challenges we still face and what the plant-based future has in store. We're joined today by the luminaries from the film. Let's start with the founder and president of Forks Over Knives, Brian Wendel. Brian is the creator and executive producer of the Forks Over Knives feature film and the founding president of the Forks Over Knives brand, which has produced not only the film, but several New York Times best-selling books, a phenomenal recipe app, popular magazine, meal planner, and even a food product line. The Forks' mission is to change the way the world sees and approaches nutrition and to promote a wholesome lifestyle based on a diet of whole plant foods. As Brian himself likes to say, he's just an ordinary guy from Staten Island, raised on pizza and roast beef. But 2 decades ago, Brian stumbled onto something extraordinary. Attending a conference on nutrition, he found out that a whole foods, plant-based diet had the power not only to prevent, but even reverse chronic disease. That information was so powerful that Brian was convinced not only to change his own life, but to spread that information as far and widely as possible, and to have the greatest impact on the lives of others. Forks Over Knives was born, and it forever changed the landscape of the plant-based revolution. Brian is joined today by a star-studded cast of plant-based heroes. You know and love them from the film, but let me just give you a brief overview of their dedicated work on behalf of the plant-based cause. We're joined by Colin Campbell, MD, who is the Jacob Gould Sherman Professor Emeritus of Nutritional Biochemistry at Cornell University. He's best known as the co-author with his son, Thomas M. Campbell, of the China Study, which documents one of the most comprehensive studies of health and nutrition ever conducted, called the Grand Prix of Epidemiology by the New York Times. Dr. Campbell is also the author of over 300 academic research papers in biochemistry, has received over 70 grant years of peer-reviewed research from the NIH and other agencies, and is the founder of the T. Colin Campbell Center for Nutrition Studies and the online plant-based nutrition certificate through eCornell, a comprehensive course which has taught many, including myself, about the importance of a holistic rather than reductionistic paradigm of nutrition. Caldwell Esselstyn, MD, is a former surgeon, clinician, and researcher at the world-famous Cleveland Clinic. Over 3 decades ago, while chairman of the Cleveland Clinic Breast Cancer Task Force, Dr. Esselstyn became disillusioned by the use of pills and procedures to treat heart disease and cancer, which were doing nothing to prevent disease, as he puts it, in the next unsuspecting victim. Deducing that the rich American diet was the culprit, Dr. Esselstyn conducted a clinical study with very ill patients that showed that even among this population, many of them at death's door, heart disease could actually be reversed solely through a low-fat, whole foods, plant-based diet. Since then, Dr. Esselstyn has continued his quest to educate the public about the power of simple yet potent foods. Rip Esselstyn is the son of Dr. Esselstyn and his dynamic wife, Anne, who also joins us today, and is a former triathlete turned firefighter who started a revolution in his Engine 2 firehouse in Austin, Texas. For years, Rip led retreats with Whole Foods Market, as well as hosted Plant Stock, the Woodstock of the plant-based movement, which I had the pleasure to attend a few years ago. These days, Rip leads Plant Strong, which develops and implements a range of programs and events geared toward educating and inspiring people to live plant strong lives, as well as hosts the Plant Strong podcast, where he interviews key figures of the plant-based movement. Last but not least, we're joined by Neal D. Barnard, MD, who's the founder and president of Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, a nonprofit that promotes preventative medicine that represents over 12,000 physicians and lobbies on behalf of more than 175,000 members across the country to promote lifestyle medicine. Dr. Barnard is founder of the Barnard Medical Center, serves as adjunct associate professor of medicine at George Washington University School of Medicine, and as fellow of the American College of Cardiology. He's also the author of several academic research papers and books on diet and health on topics as wide-ranging as diabetes, cancer, food cravings, weight loss, and most recently, hormonal management. BCRM is also well known for advocating on behalf of animals in medical education and research. All right, so now that we're all well reacquainted, I'd love to jump into some questions for you all. I'd like to take the opportunity today to reflect together on how far we've come, but also think about some of the challenges we face as a movement and where plant-based is heading next. After the panel, we'll be answering audience questions as well. So if you have a question for our panel, please type it into the chat box at the bottom of the window. Our team will be reading through all the questions and we'll choose a few to answer at the end of the webinar. All right. Brian is the founder of Forks. I'd love to begin by asking you what inspired you to make the film. Can you tell us about your journey from real estate into filmmaking?
Yeah, and Nina, first I just want to say thank you. Thank you for leading this discussion. It's great. It's great to have you here, and it's great to have everybody on this panel. So thank you so much. And for me, as you mentioned, my journey into plant-based began literally 2 decades ago, back in 2001. I was really a student of the plant-based lifestyle. I liked learning about it, and I was, I didn't call it plant-based back then, but it was definitely a healthy vegan. I understood the concept of whole food. My mentor was somebody named Doug Graham, who really believed in eating a lot of whole fruit. So it's kind of very similar to what I do today. Still eat a lot of whole fruit, but very similar, low fat, low sodium, and just became very passionate about it over the years. I mean, I was a big advocate to all my friends, everything. But a big moment for me, Nina, was when I read the China study. And that was in 2010. And I was just blown away. Like, I knew there was a lot of information out there about the ability to prevent and reverse disease. But when I read the China study, it just made me go, wow, there is such a powerful case to be made. And I just point out that in the China study, it's not just about Colin's work in China or just about Colin's work in general. It's really about so much of the information that Colin came across. And at that point, I just felt so like this information about the ability to prevent and reverse disease just wasn't getting out there. And I always like to say, if there was something that can do, if there was a pill that can do what a plant-based diet could do, it would be the headline story, it would have been a headline of Time Magazine or Newsweek, but it really just wasn't getting out there. And I really thought about many different things. I thought about maybe going back to school and studying nutrition. I just realized that I really wanted to incorporate this into my life. And ultimately, I thought, it occurred to me that there was so much information in writing, but I thought a visual presentation would be something that would be really powerful. I really started to move towards the idea of making a film. And when that idea really came to my head, I was just like, oh my God, this is my purpose in life. This is what I really want to do. And literally from the moment that I decided I wanted to do this, it was 3 months before we were in production, put together a production team, and away we went. And we started making Forks Over Knives in January of 2009. So that was kind of my journey. And as you know, Nina, I always thought I was going to go back to real estate, but was just having so much fun. Here I am 10 years later, still working on my passion project.
Amazing. And I'd like to know from all of you what the film has meant to you, both for your professional work and your personal mission in life.
Neal, you want to hit it first?
Don't all answer at the
Okay.
same time.
All right, we need a director here, don't we? Yeah, I got to tell you, it's a funny thing. So many people, and I'm sure everybody here has this experience, where people say, that film just started it all for me. I hear this all the time. So many people, you bump into them at the grocery store, just anywhere. They're thinking about changing their diet, or in many cases, they're already far down the road. And you ask, what was it? I was just kind of surfing, looking for a movie. And I happened to see this one, and I just kind of couldn't turn it off. And by the end, that was it for me. So I hear that all the time. It's and I'm going to call that sort of a mixture of inspiration plus validation. It inspires because you can see the power of it, but it's validated because it's honest, and it's based in research.
No, I think the cool thing about the movie is that when you go to someone and you say, you should change how you eat, and the person immediately pulls back and but that movie suddenly turns it around and makes people feel, oh, I should do this. It's just a flip. And I think it's incredible how it does that without preaching.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. It's so absolutely inviting. And for me, Nina, I had written the Engine 2 diet book. I had just been invited to become a health eating partner with Whole Food Market stores. Brian and myself and Whole Foods decided to start this collaboration where we would, and you can see the poster behind me here, right? This movie could save your life, but where about 30 cities around the United States we hosted these free screenings, and literally every one of them was sold out. Some of the cities like Chicago, we had a wait list of up to 500 people. But for me personally, it's incredible what Forks Over Knives did to my kind of burgeoning career as a healthy eating advocate in the plant-based space. For example, the Engine 2 Diet book came out in 2009, and this thing hit and it catapulted sales of Engine 2. It really just helped, as Neal said, it inspired, but also helped validate everything that I was trying to get out into the universe. And just can't say enough, fabulous things about Forks Over Knives and what it was able to do, I think, for everybody that's here and beyond.
Well, I can remember actually when I was very excited about some of our earlier results from the studies that we had done with patients who were seriously ill with heart disease. I was so excited, and I was determined to somehow get the word out. So I put together a thing we called the First National Conference on the Elimination of Heart Disease in 1991, and about 100 people showed up. But we did it again 7 years later down in Epcot in Disney World, and this time we had 500 doctors and nurses. But it absolutely suddenly it paled in comparison to getting the word out compared to what really Forks Over Knives was able to do. My gosh, as soon as I had this opportunity to suddenly have patients on this film where really the public got to see what they were like sort of beforehand and how powerful whole food plant-based nutrition could be with reversing their disease. And from 2010, for the next 11 years, I have never traveled so much in my life. That was just crazy. And there were times when you'd be going through an airport and people would point you out. My God, it was pretty hard to believe.
He's going to his seat in an airplane and someone would jump up as he's passing by. Oh, I know you.
Well, it was such a reflection of the power of the film. But to me, what was so exciting was anybody who saw this suddenly now had such a much greater awareness of what they could do to be healthy.
Yeah, what's amazing about the film is just how, its reach, like the amount of people that it can reach. Like if you just do a conference or something, it's and I think it was the first film that, had that kind of reach. And there have been films, of course, since then, but this was really the first one that really, got a lot of people interested. And Colin, I'd love to hear from you as well, what the film was like for you to do and how it impacted your personal mission.
Well, I was in the scientific community in academia for many, many years before that, and had really gotten very excited about some of the stuff that we were learning at the time during the 70s and 80s. And so I was struggling a bit to start with to convince my colleagues was not very easy. They had a different agenda. Somehow they didn't really want to talk about things that are, of a practical nature, to be honest about it. And so when I got to that point, wanted to talk about it publicly, if you will, it was a bit of a struggle. But then when Brian came along and said something to me about this, I thought, wow, I felt honored, first off, Brian, that you had asked me, you and Lee, at the time. And I thought, well, here's a way to, obviously, as all of you have just said, to visualize this. So for me, it was visualizing, cold, hard facts of science, if you will, in a sense, and make it real for people. And so, it was a game changer. It was a game changer for me. And there it went. And thereafter, like Esther said a moment ago, me too. When I was going through airports, it always seemed to be airports. I'm not sure exactly why. I guess I was on the plane all the time, like he was. But I remember one time in an airplane, the stewardess announced on the door of the plane, and he went to the front of the plane and took a picture. Look at that. That was kind of embarrassing, but it was in airports and airplanes, I guess, where I got the most. Although one time I was walking through a woods, and somebody get me in the woods on a trail. It was really crazy. So I figured, well, if getting into the woods like that, that's okay with me.
Yeah.
Amazing thing about the film is that not only did it inspire, I mean, of course, I'm not surprised people came up to you on airplanes and so on, because it really changed people's lives. People, their lives were saved in many cases. But also what's amazing, like when I was doing my research at Harvard, I interviewed hundreds of people around the world, and I was amazed just at how many had changed their careers or started their careers in the plant-based field because of the film. I'm just remembering, the director of the Titanic and Avatar, James Cameron, and his wife, Susie Amos Cameron. She watched the film while on a treadmill, and then, because of Forks Over Knives, they're now leading plant-based investors and have a whole plant-based line. I know that a lot of you mentioned that you love the Game Changers too in the chat, and the filmmaker James Cameron had also mentioned that he was inspired to make the documentary in part because of Forks. So all of you have been in the field for a long time, so I can only imagine what the shift was for you, because you had seen it for decades. And I guess that leads me to ask Brian. I've asked you this before, but Brian, just for our audience, I'm wondering, did you have a sense of the impact this film would have when you were making it? Like, did it sort of did it surprise you? To what extent it was impactful? Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, when we were making this film, and this surprises a lot of people who ask me this question, but we absolutely felt we were onto something. I mean, more than 50% of the population is going to suffer from either heart disease or type 2 diabetes. And we knew that we were going to speak to those people. We knew the information was really powerful. So even as we were filming, we'd come back and go, wait until people see this. This is going to be unbelievable. But we really believed in what we were doing. I couldn't afford not to. So we really believed in that outcome. And we also believed very much in the way we were going about it, which was really focusing on the science. And one thing that was very important to us, Nina, is that we didn't want to insult the very audience that we were trying to persuade.
Right.
So, so we were very careful to speak to people, to make a sober presentation, to keep the presentation to people, to experts that were credible, and really kind of start to really plant that seed that, hey, obviously Forks isn't the full case on plant-based diet, but we tried to take the most powerful elements of that and say, hey, maybe there's something there. And another very important piece to us also was, as you see Forks Over Knives as those reality patients, and it's something Colin and I have talked about over the years too, is just, hey, what does the science really mean at the end of the day if it doesn't have a practical application? So not only was it important to make the scientific presentation, but to show that application and show how reliable it really is. If you stick to the diet, it will almost always work, which is amazing. Obviously, there's always issues with compliance and so on. So the answer is yes. We thought that the way we were telling it, the message that was encapsulated in that film, we thought it was going to really resonate, and thankfully it did.
Yeah.
I want to jump in on what you said, Brian, because you're right. It's not just all science. It's also the practicalities. What do you do? And to me, the biggest testimony for that was what Rob Ostfeld does. He's a cardiologist at Montefiore in New York City. And the people come in. They go through registration. They get into their room, and they're going to be having surgery or whatever it is. And he'll talk to the patient. But before he leaves the room, he gives them their remote on their TV. And he says, I put on your channel, like channel 66 or whatever it is, something I want you to watch. And you know what it is. And the whole point is, whatever their hospital care may be, if you don't get that person some tools and some inspiration to change their life afterward, you're going to have trouble. So the movie is there. It's loaded up in the whole hospital. Every single room in the whole hospital is wired with your film. So the people watch it, and their reluctant spouse is there in the room. Their kids are there in the room. They're all hanging out watching this movie in a hospital. And to me, that's a sign that it hits exactly the sweet spot between information, inspiration, practicalities.
Right.
I know doctors who run it continuously just in their waiting rooms, Forks Over Knives.
Yeah. And people don't want to leave them there, hanging in your waiting room. Exactly.
And for those of you in the medical field, I'm just wondering, what have you seen in terms of people's willingness and openness to this diet? Like, how has the film helped, you kind of prescribe lifestyle medicine rather than just, pills and procedures?
I'd like to make a comment on that. It's a good question. I see two audiences. One of them is kind of distressing, to be honest about it. And the other audience is so happy, so joyful. I couldn't imagine two groups being further apart. We're, unfortunately, we're kind of in a polarized society now. I have seen that in this field as well. Being in science was kind of staid and, formal in some ways. Pride's whatever they're proud of is one thing, and they're reluctant to change. And of course, we also know there's a lot of other people reluctant to change too, and they get pretty hostile at times. So that's one world I try to keep out of, but nonetheless I see it. And on the other hand, the people in the public, like all of you have just been saying, I mean, once they realize it works, a light goes on, and a lot of them stay. But there it is. It's just, so I've often thought this about how to transition, in a sense, like all of you have, transition from the basic information, into something meaningful that they can really use all the time. And that's the transition that obviously needs to be made and still needs to be made these days. Yeah.
Colin, just to reinforce that, really, with the in my world, where the rubber hits the road is whether you're able to achieve the compliance. Because no matter how wonderful whole food plant-based nutrition is, the way it works is the patients have to buy in, and I mean buy in 100%. And Forks Over Knives has immediately been such an absolute valuable ally. I mean, many of the patients who sign up to see me, fortunately, before they've ever had a chance to see me, have seen Forks Over Knives, so that when they get exposed to the science again, they're having already seen it in depth in Forks Over Knives. It really softens the pathway and makes it much easier to facilitate their willingness to go in 100%.
I think, yeah, there's a sort of gap between seeing the film and then actually being able to, implement that in your actual life. And another thing that I've noticed, at least in my experience, is that, the challenge of getting young people interested, because many young people care about the planet and about animals, and they even go vegan, philosophically, but fewer of them actually care about their health, mostly because they don't think about the long-term consequences of dietary choices. So I've just noticed that many of the people who are inspired by the film are older and have chronic health conditions. And so I'm wondering, how do you get not only those older people who, have these chronic conditions, but these younger people who actually, if you instill those norms earlier on, then people are actually able to carry those throughout their lives. So I'm just curious what you all think about that.
I'm thinking that this is changing a lot, because when people used to talk about what a diet would do, what does a diet do? It helps you lose weight, or it'll help you with your heart. But from there, and I think the movie played a big role in this, is that the possibilities started to grow. Colin has talked a lot about cancer, and not just preventing cancer, but also changing the course of cancer once it's taken root. And I will never forget, I was at my medical school, GW Medical School. I was talking with a colleague before this film came out. And I remember him turning to me and he said, "What do you mean, Neal? You mean there's actually stuff you can do? You really can prevent cancer?" And they had this idea that it was just in your genes. That was it. There wasn't anything you could do. Well, yeah, I guess you could quit smoking, but after that, there's nothing you could do. But I guess my point is that you open the door to things. And to answer your question, really, Nina, it's heart disease and so forth are thought of as the diseases of maybe middle life. But then what's happened is, as the door has opened, all kinds of issues for younger people have walked in. Obviously, kids are worried about their weight. Plant-based diet is the healthiest, best way for permanent weight loss. And then we've looked at things like fertility, menstrual cramps, acne, all of these things that who knew had anything to do with food? But now we know that. And then, of course, athletes now, that in the past several years have all been turning to this. All of that is speaking to young people. So I think what you said is true. Kids care about animals, they care about the environment, but I see so many young people who, frankly, they're worried about number one, and they're turning to a plant-based diet because it's getting them to where they want to be.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
I would like to add another comment on that too, about influencing people. One of the things that really convinced me of something that I saw in the laboratory under experimental conditions, but I hadn't really seen it with people. Of course, I'm not a clinician. But when S came out, Dr. Ornish as well, and you, Neil, with your diabetes studies too, that there was a there was a sort of a new awareness that this food thing is not just about preventing disease. It's about actually reversing. I mean, S used a famous word in his book, you know, and that I translate that in turn to the word treatment. You know, and that's one thing, and I know you guys in the medical profession, that's not exactly the place to go to talk about that diet, that, you know, it can actually be used to treat disease. And I find that a really big deal, because this is something immediate for those people who need to, you know, to have this experience. And for the young people, they tend to they kind of dismiss it, except these days are more interested in the environment, of course, they're more tuned into that. But when young people are young, they tend to dismiss things that might happen 30, 40, 50 years down the road. We're all the same, I guess. But suddenly when you realize somebody's sick, they need help, they do this, and within a matter of maybe even days, certainly weeks, they see the amazing results. That, I would say, that is the ticket to the future.
Yeah.
To me, that's the ticket to the future, is actually treating people with illness. I'm excited about that idea anyhow, because it's so dramatic. It's so dramatic, and it's so, it basically raises a question about what is medical practice all about? Well, most people think it's about taking medicines, let's say, but the idea of using food to achieve even better results and longer term results, I find that exciting.
Right, and as Dr. Barnard mentioned, also treating things that we didn't necessarily think were diet related, like, you know, menstrual cramps and acne and things like that affect a lot of younger people as well. So, so one thing I wanted to talk about as well is, you know, a lot of people believe that the Forks Over Knives film is what really popularized the term plant-based, which is far more inclusive and less divisive than the sort of classic term vegan. But as much as there's excitement about plant-based living and people know more about it now, people often have very different ideas about what plant-based actually means, and it's a very fuzzy term. So for some, plant-based means, you know, a Beyond Burger with a side of French fries. Whereas for you whole food plant-based folks, it means, you know, whole food staples like rice and beans. So a lot of people pick up, you know, a tub of ice cream at the grocery store and they think this is healthy for me because it's got this label plant-based. So I'd love for all of you to speak to how the plant-based term has spread. You know, since many of you have been in this for decades, so you've seen how it's really taken off, and sort of the pros and cons of that spreading and the sort of people's ideas of what that term means.
You know, before we answer the question, I just wanted to just clarify something. I want to distinguish between the idea of popularizing and starting the term plant-based. We certainly did not start it. It was something that Colin Campbell used, and he can speak to the history of that. But we, in doing our research and reading the China study, we did feel that plant-based was a more appropriate term for use because it was more scientific.
Right.
So you know, it didn't have the ethical connotations. And also, certainly, if you look at populations around the world, you know, in many cases, there are places that eat tiny amounts of animal foods. So we also, from our perspective, we didn't want to, you know, they're certainly not vegan populations, and yet they're very healthy, even though, you know, they're eating a very small amount of animal products. Anyway, I wanted to clarify that, make sure I give credit to where credit is due.
It actually looks like it's a term that's been around for a long time, but I think whole food plant-based, that really comes from Colin's work, and then plant-based really took off with the film and you know, with other companies and so on using it. But in that is that fuzziness about really like, what does it mean? You know, people's different ideas.
Yeah, I'd like to make a comment on that. And by the way, that idea for me at least came almost accidentally, incidentally, or last minute kind of thing. I was on a panel of NIH determining priorities for research funding of grant applications that were coming in at the time. And it was on a cancer research panel. And this was 1978, 79. And there were some applications starting to come in referring to the possibility that nutrition might have a role in experimental cancer, if you will. All my colleagues on that committee, of about 13 or 14 of us, they're all oncologists or molecular biologists and so forth. Nutrition is a foreign word. I was the only guy in there who actually did the nutrition part of it. So I was asked to come into the next meeting and sort of run through a little bit of brief presentation. What is this thing called nutrition, if you will? It's kind of strange. And that was in, as I say, 78, 79. And there was the word out there at the time, vegetarian. And no offense, Neil, in this particular case, but for myself, at Cornell, the vegetarian organization on the camp was actually demonstrating outside of our lab at times because we were using experimental animals. So I know the sensitivity between the scientific community with regards to that particular question. And so when I was talking to my colleagues, I knew if I said, "Oh, this is all about vegetarianism," I didn't know the word vegan in those days. I'm not going to engage them all that much. So the plant-based, I'm not actually that excited about. That's the best word, to be honest about it. That was just kind of off the top of the head. Rip use Plant Strong, and now I hear other ideas about plant forward. And I sort of see it. Criticism of plant-based, I've heard that too. What does that mean? That means, okay, diet is primarily plant, but not all. Well, that's not what I was talking about. It has to be more complete, as we all know. So the plant-based thing got stuck in the web and the netting in a sense, but it was almost I don't know, hearsay, happenstance thing that I just wanted to emphasize the science. Yeah. But that's what because I was talking to my colleagues in science, and the only way I could get there was to do it that way.
Well, Nina, I think we're in a really, I think we're in the midst of the plant-based era right now. And I think that you could say that, Forks Over Knives really kicked this thing into gear back in 2011 when it was launched. But this has truly gone from a micro trend to a macro trend to a mega trend to being full-blown mainstream. And you see plant-based branded now on everything. And to me, it's great. It's fantastic because we're in the midst right now of a full-blown climate emergency. Mother Earth is crying out. And to me, we got to get as many people as we can on this side of the field, right? Plant-based or predominantly plant-based. And just like we were able to successfully get the 51% of the smokers, we were able to eradicate smoking from the 50s, 60s to now less than 20%. Imagine if we could get less than 20% of Americans, right, and beyond consuming, all these animal products and animal byproducts. It'd be fabulous. So I'm not going to get too bent out of shape about plant-based or whole food plant-based. I just think we need to get people eating plant-based. The Beyond Meats and those things, obviously they're not healthy, but let's get people on our side of the field as much as we can right now.
Mm-hmm. And what advice would you give to people who are trying to navigate, the new exploding product landscape as healthfully as possible, given your knowledge?
I'd say if you have heart disease, read the ingredients.
Yeah, I'm not ready to really embrace those products because they've never been really tested in terms of whether they're healthy or not. Many of them have a lot of oil, some have more heme iron, and I really would be extremely cautious about that. We have to, if young people were aware of some of the research that shows that if we do autopsy studies on young women and men between the ages of 17 and 34 who have died of accidents, homicides, and suicides, early coronary artery disease is now ubiquitous. Not enough for their cardiac event, but already there it is established. And therefore, I think that young people can't really look at themselves as being, without any risk, or immune.
Right.
It used to be when veggie burgers came out, sometimes they came out as a mix and you like have to combine them with water and then you'd pat them into a patty and throw them in your fry pan. And they really were, let's say, terrible. And then what a great advance that you could actually buy one at the store already made and somebody figured out how to make it good. And they were really pretty low in fat. and healthy. I'm talking about some years ago. And they were a convenient food that you could have on hand and kids would like them and that kind of stuff. But then out of the blue, Pat Brown and some others said, okay, well, wait a minute. That's not going to seduce a real carnivore. And so I think the idea of, say, the Impossible Burger was really not to go to people who are already avoiding animals. It was to try to seduce heavy meat eaters. And so the good thing is it's kind of sort of effective methadone, really, for a person who's addicted to meat. Their methadone, so to speak, is a burger that's got just about as much fat as in meat, but there's no moo in it, there's no cholesterol in it, and so forth. The negative of it is that, frankly, just as you said, S, to make it like meat, they throw in huge amounts of coconut oil and things, which, along with all the marketing that goes along with it, people somehow think that's healthy. And it really does trouble me a little bit. So I don't really speak against those products if it's done solely to convince a carnivore that they don't need animal products. And then after a couple of weeks, they go to healthier and simpler foods. But I don't think that's what's happened. The marketing behind these things is such that high-fat products are out there a lot, and especially coconut and palm oil, where people imagine this is somehow magic stuff, and it will absolutely raise your cholesterol. I'm convinced it's probably as strongly linked to Alzheimer's disease as animal fat is. And so people should use it to shine their shoes or something, but they shouldn't really be eating that at all. So I'm glad they're there from that, that kind of transition standpoint, but that transition's got to be really, really short. That said, there is so much competition in this area that the good products come out. Look at all the things that you've pioneered, Rip. These are things where when our research participants come in, like, which burger can I eat, which food, which product lines can I look at? Engine 2 is one where you never have to apologize, because everything there is going to work for people.
And Rip's burgers, you cook them in the toaster. You just put them in the toaster. How can you beat that?
I did that, but I discovered you can't put the ketchup in at the same time. You got to take it out first.
Yeah, brilliant. But you know what? Let me just piggyback on what Neal was saying, because I think what Beyond and Impossible doing is actually great, and it's just an evolution of where this space is going. There's more and more people jumping into this space. It's the fastest growing food space, going right now. And you look online now, and there are so many now healthy plant-based options for burgers that are out there that are absolutely delicious, that are a far cry, Neal, from the first packs that you would mix with water and all that stuff. So it's just competition. There's gonna be more and more products. It's gonna be exciting over the next 5 to 10 years to see what's available.
Yeah, the thing is, they're not a health food, as you said, Rip. They're marketed to the omnivore, and I mean, I think the danger is people thinking that it's like a health food, and that's sort of maybe potentially a problem. But it's definitely great, better for the environment and for animals certainly, and even for people just being kind of more used to eating something different than animal products.
Yeah, also, while you're at, if you don't mind, one of the things that I am troubled by is some people will speak against vegan junk food. And I think we should not use that word. And here's why. If a person who's eating burgers and candy and all this kind of stuff, if they stop eating animal products and become vegan, that's good. That's a great thing. Even if all the junk is still in their diet, that's a good thing. But they're going to have to realize that was just the first step. You got rid of the animal products, great. Now look at what's left. All that junk food you've been eating all your life, let's have a look at that too. And this evolution then takes over, and people so often start discovering the joy of simpler and simpler food. So anyway, I think, as you're saying, Rip, I think there is a market for these transitional foods. They are better than the animal products they replace, always. Even Impossible is better than the burger. But their real value is transition.
But it's amazing to me how many people don't truly understand that, for example, that Earth Balance, buttery spread is really, it's 100 calories per tablespoon and loaded with just oil. That diet cheese, yes, we'd rather have them eat that than cheese, but if you're trying to follow my father's program and reverse your heart disease, that's not the ticket. That's not going to get you to the promised land.
Right. So I think it's actually incumbent upon like brands like Rips and ours really to consistently beat that drum about the differences between a whole food plant-based diet and kind of these products that are now labeled as plant-based, because I do think that in the 10 years since we've come out with the film, we have seen more confusion about these things. Like I say, I watched Forks Over Knives, and now I'm eating Impossible Burger every day. And certainly what they're doing is they're saying, like, hey, these products happen to be high in protein, and they're making people focus like, hey, replace your animal protein with a plant protein. And that may be better, I guess, in theory, but they're not taking the next step and saying like, hey, maybe we don't need such a highly concentrated amount of protein in the first place. But I think it's incumbent upon us to consistently draw that distinction. So I also wonder that people getting into this from a junk food perspective, eating a lot of fake meats and fake cheeses, aren't going to be satisfied with the outcome that they're trying to achieve, if they're trying to achieve an outcome of disease prevention and reversal. So I think it's also about measuring up what those goals are for someone going in and explaining the differences between these products.
Yeah, managing expectations, absolutely.
Neil, you don't like the term vegan junk food. What's another term?
It's just, I mean, it's the same thing as omnivorous junk food. What I'm saying is a person didn't become vegan and suddenly discover barbecue potato chips. They were eating that junk all along, is my point. So they've been eating candy and the things that they call junk food that was sort of an omnivorous diet too. They were eating those things. That's my point. And so sometimes they sort of beat up on vegan convenience foods. And I don't think we should do that. I think when a person goes to a vegan diet, that's a good thing. And they should get a big pat on the back for doing exactly that. But then they discover there's more to it. And there really is, I got to say, what we often do, we just finished a study on menopausal symptoms for women who are just getting eaten up by hot flashes. And what we did is 3 things. It's vegan, no animal products, but it's also really low in oil. And then we add soybeans to it because of the isoflavones. And that's the triple combination. I can bore you with why it works. But what we tell people to do, they say, all right, I'm going to get a burger. And I see 25 brands. So they pick up the box, take it out of the freezer, whatever it is. And they look at the fat content. And if it's 3 grams per serving or less, they buy it. And so they know, okay, engine 2, wow, that's the one that always works for me. But some of the others don't. The others are for people who don't have the health issues that they might have. So 3 is our magic number for the amount of fat in a serving size. And that really helps them a lot.
Yeah.
Can I offer something a little bit, just a little bit novel, a little bit different, not necessarily, but from this conversation at least, about how to get people convinced, this whole idea. One of the things that struck me, partly because of my participation years ago, is the fact that at the national level, in the political arena, an area, Neil, that of course you've participated in as well, there is this notion, I think it's pretty obvious, medical schools don't teach nutrition, okay? Physicians who wish to get in this area and learn something about it, it's hard for them to get compensated appropriately for this kind of work, right? And so, and thirdly, there's no National Institute of Nutrition at the NIH. So, sort of at the national level, the thing that's really intrigued me is the fact that having been involved in this policy area myself, is the refusal, almost a proactive positioning of some administrators, politicians, whatever, sort of basically denying this reality. And so we need to have people, we need to somehow get involved in that web to say, look, the information that's being provided at a very high level for the whole society at large is flawed. And it's time for us to start talking about, this concept of nutrition. And that means plant-based, basically. So yeah. I would like to put a plug in the one thing that irks me quite a bit is this whole 2010 Supreme Court decision on Citizens United, where rich organizations could then essentially now, ever since, be able to buy politicians. Politicians in turn, controlling what is the dietary guidelines, for example. So we got a really big, very big problem here at a very senior level, that somehow the nutrition is this kind of information is not getting out to the public, at that level. So we suggest maybe that's not important. It's really all about grassroots at the end of the day. That's maybe the best way to do it. But it's something to consider at least.
Let me jump in on what you're saying, Colin. Back in 1991, you came to Washington, D.C., and you spoke at the Willard Hotel when we talked about the fact that meat and dairy products weren't required. It wasn't a question of whether you should be vegan or not. It was just, you don't need to have meat and dairy every day. And you gave your talk. You were there. Dennis Burkett was there. The person who discovered the value of fiber against cancer. And the New York Times reported on your comments. And back then, the medical associations came out and said, this is ridiculous. You need meat every day. You need dairy products every day. And to look at how they have changed their tune, realizing you don't need it, you're probably better off without it. Well, actually, you're definitely better off without it. But if you don't mind, I want to share one tip, because I think a lot of this is not just governmental. A lot of this is just individual. It's individual resistance. And I discovered this with my own mom. I had a DVD of Forks Over Knives, and like, why don't you watch this? Watch this with Dad. And, I would come back 3 months later and visit my parents again. I would discover that it was in the exact same spot on the living room table where I'd left it before. And they didn't open it up. And I thought, what's that about? Yeah, I would give these DVDs to a lot of people. They wouldn't open up. I found the answer. Gave it back to my mom. I said, I completely forgot to tell you the most important thing. And there's a Post-it on the front. It says, Mom, when you get to between about 45 minutes and about an hour 10 in this movie, Mom, that is you. That is exactly you. That is why I love you so much. She calls me up later, says, Neal, I watched that movie 6 times. And I can't, what is it in that time that made you think of me? And I said, Mom, that whole movie made me just think of, I want you to live well. That was it. Oh, it was a trick. So anyway, you can do this with anything. You got to tell people, okay, here's Essa's book. And you put a Post-it on page 37 and one on one of the recipes and one in somewhere else. You say, that is you. That is really, they are going to open it up. They're going to read it. They're going to do the chapter before, the chapter after. They're going to call it, what is it about that? You got to get that. You just got to break them in, because once they see your movie, they don't zap away. They watch it. It's engaging, but it's just kind of getting them in there. So that's my Post-it trick. It works.
For all of you wondering how to get people excited, this is a great tip. Thanks, Neal. Well, I just wanted to mention mention what Dr. Campbell had mentioned about, the fact that the plant-based movement is still up against a powerful set of industry lobbies representing meat, dairy, and egg producers, and they have an outsized impact on the dietary guidelines. And even now, it feels like there needs to be, a paradigm shift, because people still worry about things like carbs, fats, and protein. So even if they, you do the Post-it trick and they watch the film, they still are like, well, where am I going to get my protein? Where am I going to get my, fats? How can I avoid carbs? They're concerned about potatoes and things. And so even these investors who are pouring in now billions of dollars into this movement, it's still along the lines of promoting this protein paradigm. And I know that the whole mission of Forks Over Knives is to really change the way the world sees and approaches nutrition, to see it more in a holistic sense, in the way that Dr. Campbell had mentioned, rather than a reductionist approach. So how do we both be excited about the fact that this movement is growing, that people are excited about plant-based protein, but then also emphasize that you really don't have to worry about macronutrients if you're just eating whole plant foods? How do you reconcile that in the public imagination?
I talked to Rip.
Wow. Oh, yeah.
Rip, you recall, I came down, I think about 3 times you had me down to speak there, and Austin was very nice. But the fact that you were participating with your background, and showing, hey, you don't need all this animal-based protein to do what you did. That's a big story. And of course, that also came out in Game Changers as well, as you know.
Yeah.
If I could just take just a moment here about the protein thing, because that's really that was the core of my research for all the years I've been involved, from protein, all that stuff. I have to tell you, and this is based on, I can't get into the details of this right at the moment, but first off, we do not need animal protein as a nutrient. We tend to, all of us think that animal protein is high quality. You know, that word high quality, either unconsciously or consciously, we have thought that for, geez, more than 100 years now, it turns out. And high quality comes from a concept, and high quality means animal-based protein. That comes from a concept, scientifically speaking, in the sense that high animal protein, whatever it may be, the amount that's retained in the body is given a higher biological value. Is given a higher biological value. And that in turn is related to rate of growth. That's the history of it in nutrition. And it turns out that's not true. Plants have all the protein we need. We certainly do not need more than that. Plants have plenty of protein. They're going to go over the recommended level by quite a bit. In fact, the recommendation more or less around 10%. So we get up to 15, even maybe 20%. So I would like to say we have to somehow address that question. Protein is not as important as, and should not be as revered as much it really is as a nutrient, as a nutrient. And it's a reverence for that. This existed for, I would say, since its founding in 1839. It's a reverence for that nutrient, the one nutrient that tends to drive people's thinking. If we can't get it off the animal, well, then how can we make protein that has the same sort of sequence, the same sort of properties? We don't need to do that.
Well, so how do we get investors, interested in health and in the promotion of nutritional education, not just sort of supporting creating plant proteins? Anybody have ideas about that?
What was that, Nina?
I didn't follow the question.
I didn't see it here.
Just to repeat, well, sort of how do you get, investors who are pouring in billions of dollars now into promoting plant proteins or other types of, proteins? How do we get them to be interested in health and in the promotion of nutritional education? In addition to that, alongside that, how do you get people excited about actually teaching people about whole foods?
I think that's going to be just the next evolution. I think that people are going to come around to the fact that a lot of these plant-based foods aren't healthy for me. They're not great for me. And so we're going to have a whole new wave of investors that are seeking healthier whole food plant-based products. But the reality is that you can get everything you need from fruits, vegetables, whole grains, beans, potatoes. And so, that's where it's tough, but I don't know. I'll let Neal, Essie, Colin answer that.
Well, I'm going to say it's kind of like medical care is doctors are in big trouble too, because when people eat these simple foods, you really don't need procedures as much. You don't need anywhere near as much testing. You don't need so much surgery. You don't need, it's astounding. People come in to see us, they've got diabetes. You see these people too, that they don't have a bottle of pills, they got a sack. And they are a gold mine for the pharmaceutical industry. And so when people are healthy, they really don't need so many other things. So I'm not quite sure how investors could soak people for more, or get them to buy more things that they may not need. But that said, I do have to say, investors have been successful. I mean, look, the dairy case used to have dairy in it. Now you look at the dairy case and you do see some cow's milk products there. But there was then soy milk, and then chocolate soy milk, and then strawberry soy milk, and calcium enriched and not. And then there was rice milk. And then there was almond milk, and then there was hemp milk, and then there was oat milk, and there's pea protein. And there's so many different kinds. They're not competing with cow's milk so much. They're competing now with each other for this enormous space. And anyway, I just see success all over it. This is a movement that is unstoppable at this point. It's a question of how fast. It's a little bit of a roller coaster like all economic things, but it is huge. It's growing, and there's no stopping it. I do have to apologize. I'm running into a research meeting right this very minute, but I just want to congratulate you, Brian. I mean, look what you have done. It's astounding. And I just got to hand it to you. And I know that you were inspired by Colin and S, and I have been too. Thank you for everything you've done. And Anne, thank you for making all of this really work for people who want to do it in their own lives. And Rip, I want to arm wrestle you again soon. Thanks for everything. Thanks for all you guys are doing.
Joining us, Neal. It's good to see you.
All right, thanks.
Sorry.
That I think is key on this is both Neal and I are members of the American College of Cardiology Nutrition Committee. And this leads me to want to say a word about causation, because what really I think has been so lacking in whether it's diabetes, whether it's hypertension, especially whether it's cardiovascular disease, is causation. Because really, the usual patient who has cardiovascular disease just comes walking out of the office with a bunch of pills, but there's been no conversation about how this individual acquired this disease. And really, there's been a basic covenant of trust since the days of Hippocrates that whenever possible, the caregiver will share with the patient what is the causation of the illness. And sadly, today in cardiovascular medicine, that simply is not being done. Not really through any malice of forethought, but sadly, we found that in our investigations that cardiologists get practically zero education in nutrition, either in medical school or in their postgraduate training. So what we're really trying to do is we're trying to equip cardiologists with some knowledge about the causation of the illness that they have been designated to treat, because it would be such an absolute immediate turnover, it seems to me, if all cardiologists suddenly embraced the importance of nutrition.
Absolutely. Well, it's 2 p.m., so I want to transition to audience questions. So we have about 15 minutes left or so. And Brian, I think we'll give this one to you from Alejandra, who asks, how did you come up with the name Forks Over Knives, which is also my question.
Yes, great question. So Forks Over Knives, actually the knives, and a lot of people don't know this anymore because it's not in the current logo. The knives are scalpels, with the scalpels representing the medical system. We had actually gone through making, almost through the end of the first cut of the film without a title. Was very desperate to come up with a title. We had all kinds of crazy working titles, hated them all. And I put out an SOS to my friends, an email that's saying like, hey, can you help us? The friends that knew what we were doing, like, can you just throw out your title? I don't care how bad of an idea it is. And a friend of mine named Dr. Armighty May, she's a veterinarian, emailed me back, fork over scalpel. And then I went fork over knife, and I went forks over knives. And as soon as I said it out loud, I got a chill. I was in Lake Tahoe at the time. I ran upstairs to my dad with all this excitement saying, look, I've got the title of the film. I said, Dad, forks over knives. I said to my stepmother, forks over knives. They just looked at me with this puzzled look and said, terrible title. But I think what I didn't share to them is when I heard forks, or when I thought forks over knives, I thought of an image of holding a fork up. And I think when you marry the title with the image, it really takes on something different than just the title by itself. I had pitched it to my team, the production team, and most of them didn't like it either at first, other than our co-producer, Allison Boone. But in a couple of days, we mocked up what a potential icon can look like. And when we did that, in a few days, everybody was on board. So forks, if you look over Rip's right shoulder, you'll see the scalpel over knives. But I think we surveyed people once to find out what the title means to them. And I think 90% of the people said something like, well, you cut steak with a knife, but you cut vegetables with a knife, but it was never really in our consciousness, because after all, my fiance is a chef, and I could tell you she's cutting vegetables and she uses a knife all the time. So that's how we came up with the title. Forks over scalpels.
I always joke because my partner's dad always calls it forks versus spoons, and it's always like, which one is going to win, forks or spoons? Okay, there's another great question from Robert, who said, what have you learned in the past 10 years that you wish you could have put in the movie? And is there any new convincing research that's coming out or that you've worked on?
Yeah, man, if we could do the movie again, I mean, I would have probably, it's hard to say. You know what, I don't like to go there, because I think the movie just worked just fine the way it was. I mean, always when you look back on something, you could say, yeah, you could have done it this or that. But the great thing about making Forks is I can honestly say this was something that was unfettered from any outside influence. It really was something that was in my heart, in collaboration with a wonderful team. So it is what it is. I can nitpick at it, but I prefer not to.
Well, to me, it's Forks Over Knives was like, the analogy I'll make is like the telephone, the first smartphone. Forks Over Knives is really this first smartphone. and then look at what has followed, all the different iterations with Cowspiracy, Forks Over Knives. I'm sorry, the Game Changers, Seaspiracy. What was the other one by Kip? But and
What the Hell?
Yeah, What the Hell? It's just there's been a sea of these movies that have followed the Game Changers, but the Game Changers was the first.
Right.
I'm sorry. Forks Over Knives. Yes.
Okay, and then let's see. Bob asks, how do we get hospitals on board with a plant-based approach? And it's something that you mentioned, Neil Barnard mentioned Rob Ostfeld's work, but how do we get, institutions like hospitals or schools on board, even though, sometimes there's this pushback from the government? What's the best way?
Looking at food in the hospitals.
S, do you want to take a shot at that, having been at the Cleveland Clinic?
Well, I think that there it depends on who your wellness officer is and what their degree of energy and persistence is going to be, because obviously all these hospitals have had these huge locked-in contracts with meals coming up in huge trucks every day, and you've got to shake that. You got quite a shakedown cruise when you begin to alter these contracts, and but persistence pays, and there's no question that little by little this can happen. Yes, but because certainly it's such a responsibility of the hospital to be able to provide patients with delicious food that is not going to injure them.
Rob Ostfeld has gotten plant-based food into Montefiore.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But I think or maybe the
I
Kaiser.
think Nina,
Go ahead.
Yeah,
Go
I
ahead.
was just going to say, Nina, it's funny from my perspective, is I feel like institutions in general are just very slow to change.
Yeah.
From the Forks perspective, we really believe in focusing a lot on the general population.
Right.
And then the institutions tend to follow, believe it or
Yeah.
not. And I think that's
Well,
something that
what
we
about
truly-
that New York restaurant? What's it called?
Evan Madison.
Yeah, I mean, plant-based, for gosh sakes.
Right. Huge.
That's huge.
Yeah, in
Yeah.
the New York Times.
Yeah. But I think it's more the Kaiser Permanente model too, where you figure out ways to incentivize the physicians
Yeah.
to, when they have healthier patients as opposed to sicker patients. And
Yeah.
And those kinds of things are following. We're seeing more and more hospitals even inquire us about putting the film in hospitals. And I know there are a lot of medical programs that are looking to adopt plant-based lifestyles, but I also think that's because the general population is getting hip to it. And that's kind of pushing the change that way. And of course, you need people in the hospital systems to be keen on it and then want to bring it in. And I think it works. I think it's cutting both ways. I think it's happening. But
There's
institutions are a little bit slower.
There's quite a conflict because what do you suppose is the biggest earner in most all hospitals? Where do they make their money?
cardiology.
Absolutely, cardiovascular disease. So it's really that makes it pretty darn challenging, because that's such a bulwark that you've got to overcome.
Yeah. And
Yeah. No, I was just gonna say, Nina, what else you got? Yeah, you got a ton of questions there.
yeah, well, actually, Christy's asking, is there a list of doctors around the country that support a plant-based lifestyle? Somebody wants their doctor to actually be in support of this lifestyle. Is there somewhere they can go?
And isn't it plantbaseddocs.com or .org where you can put in your zip code and it brings up all the
Yes.
lifestyle medicine providers?
Yep.
Is that what it is? Is it plantbaseddocs.org or .com? What is
Both.
it? Really?
Both.
Okay.
Docs.com.
I think Neil Barnard at PCR, don't they have also a search sort of engine there for that?
You know,
They might. I just don't know if it's
They
as
might be searching
robust
for
as some of these other ones, but yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, there it is, plantbaseddocs.com. Yeah.
Perfect.
From
Okay.
Vincent. Thanks, Vincent.
Yeah, that really helps, because often it's like, the doctors that are pushing back or the nutritionists that are pushing back. So if you have somebody who's actually on board, they can really support your journey. And then Les says, he says, I know Dr. Barnard talks about cheese being addictive. However, I don't hear much about the standard American diet or the Western diet as being an addiction. Do you consider the SAD diet sort of addictive? And sort of my question, just to add to that, is like, often we talk about taste as being such an important driver, but I'm always amazed at the fact that when you really adopt a simpler diet, that's actually what you start craving. Like your taste paradigm shifts. So people have a very limited sense of what the future, their future self is going to enjoy, right? So they have this feeling like, I need exactly this thing. But once you change your diet, it actually kind of shifts, because it's not as addictive, it sort of shifts your taste paradigm. So I guess
Yeah,
would you consider that?
the Bunnell Chemical Senses Center in Philadelphia did some interesting work on that. They took really 3 different dietary levels of fat, one at 34% fat, the other at 20% fat, and then the other down around 10 or 11% fat where we are. And they found that over a 12-week period, one of those groups has lost their craving for fat. In other words, what has happened is their fat receptor in their brain for fat has been turned off. And you can do the same thing with sugar, but it does take a while. And it's when you say, was the SAD diet addictive, you've got to find out that those components of addiction, namely the fat and the sugar, are something that absolutely you can downregulate the fat receptor, but you've got to be square with your patient and say that this is going to be so important to lower your receptor.
Yeah. Well, in the film, I mean, you interviewed Dr. Doug Lyle, and he talks about the pleasure trap and how you can sort of, even if you're eating, vegan, you're still eating the junk foods and things, you can sort of not still be on that curve. And so you still crave those things, like the fats in particular.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. We have to bring down the amount of salt, sugar, and fat so it's not so hyperinflated. And then we can basically regain our lost palate that seriously has been hijacked by all these food manufacturers these are the tricks of the trade. They just put in so much salt, sugar, and fat that you become, like you mentioned when you started this question, you become kind of addicted to these foods.
Mm-hmm. And Stacy says that she's been vegan for 3 weeks. And if you had one piece of advice to someone who's just starting their journey, and I guess part of the advice would be, because, the rate of recidivism, or people sort of coming off the diet, is very, very high. I think it's like 90%, because we just don't have this sort of infrastructure and the social norms and so on. It's changing, of course, but if you could give one piece of advice, what would it be to someone really just starting out who just watched the film, for example?
Yeah, I would say, first of all, just be patient. That's advice number 1, but also have fun. Find the foods that you really enjoy. A lot of times people go on a healthy lifestyle and all of a sudden they start reading things and they're like, oh, I should pick kale over collards because it has more of this or that.
Yeah.
I say really look within the scope of this lifestyle, all the foods, and find what you like. If you love to eat sweet potatoes, eat sweet potatoes. If you love to eat black beans, or you like black bean soup, find the foods you like, find the recipes that have the things that you really, really enjoy eating. Because really plant-based, hopefully plant-based is really, it's the comfort foods we already enjoy. A lot of times they're relegated to the side dish. Now they're taking center stage, and we may be preparing them a little differently. For example, we may make mashed potatoes without butter. We may do it something more simply, maybe with a little bit of almond milk. So find those foods that you love and just keep having at it and have fun and enjoy.
Yeah, let me piggyback on what Brian said. Keep it simple. Don't try and overcomplicate it, and find a breakfast, 1 or 2 breakfasts that you absolutely love and adore, and just go to those, right, for the first 3 months. Same thing with lunch, find 2 or 3, and then dinner, find 6 or 7, rotate around those for the first, 3 to 6 months, and then gradually expand your repertoire. But yeah, doesn't have to be exotic.
I'd like to close with a bit of optimism, and that is that really, I think I see in front of us what could really be a seismic revolution in health. And this seismic revolution that we see is never going to come about with the invention of another pill, another procedure, or another operation, but it will come about when we persist in getting out the message of whole food, plant-based nutrition, and especially establishing for the public a knowledge of nutritional literacy that will literally empower them as the locus of control to absolutely annihilate chronic illness.
Beautiful, Les. Thank you.
Well, we only have a few minutes left, and the last question is from Allison to Brian, which is, when is the Forks Over Knives sequel coming out?
Well, I can tell you right now, I'm not working on a Forks Over Knives sequel. Filmmaking was not, being in the film business was not a personal passion of mine. This message was. So the film served that very well. And I'm doing exactly what I want to do. And if a video project comes into my future, then I'll, I'll maybe entertain it then, but it's certainly not at the forefront right now.
All right, sounds good.
Nina, before we wrap up, I just want to just say, just say one more thing about our 10th anniversary. That our work at Forks Over Knives, we really stand on the shoulders of the pioneers in the movement, like Colin Campbell and Caldwell Esselstyn and Neal Barnard. I feel like we helped popularize their message, but the truth of the matter is, Colin and S and Barnard and John McDougall and people like that literally spent decades working on this, and a lot of times facing quite the opposition.
Yeah.
And I just want to say that how grateful and thankful I am to them. And one more last bit of gratitude on our 10th anniversary, and that's to thank our audience. We would not have made it 10 years. So our Forks audience, thank you so much for trusting in us, and we want to continue to earn your trust for another 10 years. So anyway, just wanted to say that. Thank you, Nina.
Absolutely. And I just want to say a big thank you for myself personally, because, you all have been doing this for decades. And Brian, if not for this film, I don't know what life trajectory I would have gone on. So I'm just grateful because it's truly, started a movement, and the movement is continuing strong 10 years later. And I want to thank all of you for taking your time out of your busy schedules to join us for this event. I want to thank Brian and his team, especially Brooke Bennett, Natalie Mardet, Liz Turner, and Courtney Davison for their help. And thank you to all of you, our audience, for your passion for plant-based living. And before you go, I just want to mention that Forks Over Knives is now streaming their groundbreaking film for free on their website. So if you've never seen it, or even if you've seen it a dozen times like me, you can watch it whenever you like. While you're there, please be sure to check out all the special content that Forks has created in celebration of their anniversary, as well as their special anniversary discount on the top-rated Forks meal planner. So thank you to everyone for joining us today. And here's to another decade and far, far beyond that of wholesome living. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. In plants we trust.
Yes, we
Right,
do.
Bert?
Wonderful job.
Thank you. Good job.
Thank you, Nina. Great work. Thank
My
you.
pleasure and honor.
Thank you.